Hi, my name is Vanya Mishkin, and my paper and presentation are about Vincent van Gogh, who was a famous painter from Holland, and I'm going to focus on his influence from the Japanese movement. The reason I chose Van Gogh was because when I went to Amsterdam this semester, I went to the museum and was really amazed at all the different types of things that happened throughout his life that influenced him as an artist and painter. Vincent Willem van Gogh was born in Holland on March 30th in the year 1853, and his parents were Cornelia and Theodorus van Gogh. He was the oldest to one younger brother and three sisters, so of five children. Theo, his younger brother, played an important role in his life, as we will later see. And his dad was a minister, so Vincent and all his siblings were raised in a very religious environment. And because of this, he thought he would grow up to be a preacher, just like his dad. Before him, his mom had another child who died at birth, whom she had named Vincent, and they buried him in the backyard. So, in terms of his personality, Van Gogh grew up in his dead brother's shadow, so he lacked confidence and was shy. His first exposure to art appeared when he was training to be an art dealer at Goupil and C. And after his training, he got transferred to work in London, where he explored more art by going into galleries and seeing different artworks. Vincent's love life was a mess, which caused him to almost give up art, and at this point, he decided to devote his life to God and pursue being a minister in different places or in countries. But many committees did not agree with his way of thinking or his way of life or his lack of motivation to study. So they forced him to do something else with his life. And this is when he decided to go back to art. Throughout his life, Theo was his biggest supporter and helped Vincent out with a lot of things. Van Gogh sent him letters regarding how he was feeling, what he was doing. For example, when he was pursuing being a minister, he would send his brother letters with Bible quotes and church experiences. Japonisme is a French term that describes the craze for the Japanese influence in all of Europe during the 19th century. It was actually most popular in France. The movement within Japonisme that was the most popular was called ukiyo-e, which can be translated into pictures of the floating world. And these paintings allowed for artists to portray their daily life through art. This art form had already passed Japan, and it made its way to Europe through the markets. And the Impressionist movement, which Van Gogh is said to be a part of, had a lot of Japanese influence. However, when it first became popular, he didn't pay any attention to it. When Van Gogh moved to France, it marked a big transition in his work. Art and drawing helped him stay emotionally stable. One of his first masterpieces, as shown here, was Potato Eaters, in which Van Gogh wanted to show the reality of the country life he was living in, and also that he was becoming a good figure painter. At this time, the Impressionist movement was going on in France, and Theo did not think that this type of work would fit into the trend. Soon, Vincent decided to move in with his brother in Paris. He became fascinated with Japanese art and started getting inspired by color and light especially. He started to develop his own brushstroke in which he included depth into his paintings. Soon, his art was majorly Japanese influenced, and the content of his paintings were also changing. He would even collect artwork and hang it up around his studio. Van Gogh moved from Paris to a city called Arles because he wanted to go somewhere with more light, color, and more intriguing landscapes. His style of art became free and expressive, and he believed that he perceived aspects of daily life the way the Japanese had. The aspects that most gave him inspiration for his artwork were unusual spatial effects, strong colors, and everyday objects. In Arles, he was living in this so-called yellow house and had invited Paul Gauguin to come live there with him. They both started to draw inspiration from each other and gave each other's ideas for their artwork. For instance, Gauguin had told Vincent that he should start including some personal flair or personality into his paintings rather than just painting things like they were in reality. They worked together for a while until disagreements started to grow and Vincent's mental illness was not in check. He began to lose a lot of his inspiration at this point to paint, but during some points in his life when he was not mentally there and lost inspiration, he always came back to one point, which was nature. And nature always helped him have a starting point to paint. For the rest of his life, Van Gogh was inspired by Japonisme at different levels, which in part depended on his mental state. Today, so many of his paintings are amongst the most expensive in the world to acquire. Now I will continue to talk about some of his pieces. Van Gogh painted Courtesan when he was living in Paris. This piece of his was actually published in a French magazine cover. He was influenced by woodcuts, which were a part of the Japanese movement and is the reason why he used bright colors and bold outlines. It depicts a courtesan, which was defined as a prostitute who usually had high-paying clients. The way to tell she is one is by the way she's wearing her hair and the belt, which is tied in the front of her kimono rather than the back. Van Gogh painted the bedroom when he was living in Arles. In this piece, he painted his bedroom in the yellow house he was living in. The reason why he used bright colors was to express the feelings of sleep. Science and research has proven that the colors that we see in paintings now are not like they were before. For example, it is known that the original color of the walls in this painting was purple rather than blue. Also, Van Gogh said to his brother that he didn't include any shadows and he flattened some aspects that the way they are because it would resemble the Japanese way of painting. Throughout his life, Van Gogh painted self-portraits of himself. One of the reasons for this was because he could not afford to hire models since he didn't have a lot of money. Something very interesting about his self-portraits is that they're all different. The way he painted himself described what his inspirations were at the time, what he was doing with his life, and in his mental state inclusively. The first few he painted did not have any color, but that surely changed when he moved to Paris. In the self-portrait here, called Self-Portrait as a Painter, Van Gogh is sitting in front of his canvas with paint and brushes. In this portrait, he wanted to use the primary colors to show the other artists that he was modern and that his style was modernized to what people were doing at the time. Lastly, this was also one of his last pieces that he painted in Paris before he moved away. Although Van Gogh was a terrific and popular artist, he did not give his health importance. He did not feed himself well. Inclusively, at one point he started eating his paint. He basically lived out of coffee, bread, and absinthe. He was also into doing a lot of drugs, which changed him as a person. So not only was his physical health poor, but then his psychological health was also not good. Back when he lived at the Yellow House and his disagreements started happening with Paul Gauguin, Van Gogh one night threatened to hurt him with a razor that he had. However, later, he decided to cut off his own ear and drop it off with a prostitute that he knew. Today, Van Gogh is commonly referred to as a painter or artist who cut his own ear off. After this incident, he painted a self-portrait of himself without his ear when he came home from the hospital. As pictured here, his facial expression in the self-portrait was meant to show that he was feeling melancholy, not knowing what to do with his life next, whether it was to keep pursuing art or whatever else he was thinking. And in the background of this portrait, there's a Japanese print, which was to show that it was still one of his greatest influences. Van Gogh's life did not improve after this. Instead, he was in and out of mental institutions trying to work on his mental health. He would still paint at times, but at other times he wouldn't at all. Depended on how he was feeling at the time. Now, there's a whole museum dedicated to him in Amsterdam, which shows all the major paintings in his life and the events that shaped him as an artist. The Japanese movement influenced his work greatly, and I think it was an important aspect to study.